Hey guys, it's Merce. Welcome back to Harpies in the Trees, where I review horror books with a supernatural focus. It's another really warm day here in Berlin, so no candles again. I just can't bear it. I'm already getting pretty sweaty as it is. I have to keep my windows and my doors closed because there's a lot of noises from outside. You know, things like screaming babies and barking dogs and leaf blowers, that kind of stuff. But that's okay. No worries. Today we're going to talk about two books. We have a double feature. We're going to be talking about two vintage books. Both vintage, both talk about demonic horror in an ancient time, and they are both really, really good. I picked this up at worldofbooks.com. It was just one of those moments where, I don't know, the cover kind of called to me and the premise sounded really cool, so I picked it up and I just actually finished reading this yesterday, and it was so good. So let me give you the lead into what this is about. So our book opens in the mid-Victorian era in England, and we are walking with Father Oliver Graffield, and he is in a location called the Seven Dials, and he is there for a very specific purpose. It seems to be that the location is haunted by something evil, and he is there to dispel it. And he has to figure out why this haunting is taking place. What's holding this soul to the world that is causing him to be such a menace in this home? After the Seven Dials takes place, Oliver is then asked to meet with an archbishop, and he brings his sister with him. And they meet with this archbishop who has something that he wants them to do for him, but he's not being very transparent about what he needs. He invites them to his home. They are brought up into a very private part of the house, which would be uncommon at that time. And they are sitting in the room, and Father Oliver is feeling very interested in a very specific corner of the room. And the Archbishop takes notice, and they have a conversation. And Father Oliver reveals to him that there is a presence in this room. And this conversation that Father Oliver is having with the Archbishop is sort of a strange conversation. It's sort of going around in circles, and the Archbishop doesn't seem very pleased that the man's sister is here. He is very skeptical, I guess, but he is putting Father Oliver through a test. So Father Oliver reveals that there is a presence here. He describes it in great detail, and the Archbishop is impressed. And now he reveals why he asked Father Oliver to be here in the first place. He reveals that he wants Father Oliver to go to this woman's home, way far out in the rural countryside, and to figure out what is happening there. Lady Seaton is claiming to experience a plethora of activity. She sees shadows, she hears voices, she feels like she's being followed and watched. She has nightmares, and also the staff, the servants, are also beginning to become very uncomfortable and experiencing a lot of activity. And it's really strange because there was no activity prior to maybe a few months before. So Oliver agrees to take his sister and go out to Lady Seaton's large, vast estate and discover what is going on. So this was such a marvelous read. There's so much packed in here in such a very small book. It moves quickly. It has characters that are likable. Father Oliver himself is a very interesting and likable character. There's mysteries to be solved. There's black arts that are involved. There is a lot of history intertwined in this story, and it's really, really cool because Paul Doherty studied history, and it's one of his passions, and you can really, really tell. We go into the Reformation period, and the story takes place in the mid-Victorian era, and just the details and the intriguing concepts of what possession is and what a haunting is and what is happening during an exorcism. So this book has so much going on. It was an astounding and just really cool story. I loved every moment of being in it. So, you know, like I said, it's gothic. It has hauntings, a haunted house that seems to have secrets within it. We also have the demonic. We have a lot of instances of manifestations and activity that is happening. We also have a wonderful time of research. Father Oliver and his sister are constantly trying to find out, you know, what is the cause of this haunting, and they are going through documents and letters, and it's so fantastic. Like, I really enjoy that stuff. And you know what's great is that it's not tedious and long where you get bogged down in all these like weird details or something. It moves really quickly, but it tells you all of these things that are very important. So this book is so cool because it's using, you know, the story of the supernatural to talk about really interesting, probably lesser known historical events, especially for people who are not British. I did read that it was going to be a new series, but I don't think it ever went there after researching it. But Paul Doherty is extremely prolific. If you can see here, this book was printed in, I believe it was 1997. And originally released in 1997. So you can see here in 1997, these are all of his books that he's already written. And I am going to get more of his books. I'm just really love his writing style. I love this character, Oliver Graffield. I really wish that he had kept going with the series, but maybe it just, you know, something happened. My only complaint is that the showdown at the end I felt was a little light. But I felt that if he was kind of sticking with Victorian concepts of haunting and terror, that it made sense. So it could have been a little bit more grittier for me at the end, but I still really, really like this. And it's a very short book. It's barely 200 pages, 211. So it's also moody and atmospheric. We have so many descriptions of interiors of the house that are kind of unsettling. We also have exteriors, like possibly the crypts. And there's also, you know, these descriptions of light and how they're coming in through stained glass windows of a church or things like that. So there's this definite wonderful atmosphere. It's also chilling and creepy. Lots of manifestation, lots of activity. If you're looking for that, like I'm always looking for that. And there's also a lot of inspiration for some of the hellish escapes that we kind of encounter in here, taken from artists like Hieronymus Bosch. I love his hellbound chimeras. They're just so cool, and that is definitely an inspiration here in the story. I gave this 95 points out of 114, and that's 4.5 stars. So our next book is 666 by Jay Anson. Our book opens with Keith and Jennifer. They have been living in upstate New York for a short while now, maybe like a couple of years. They had moved from New York City, from the metropolis life, and gone up to more of a quieter rural life. And at the moment they are just sort of living their lives as they've sort of kind of just fell into them as they have. So Keith is running a carpentry business where he does anything from like house repair, or he'll build you a porch, or you know, he's gonna work on fixing a house, like whatever you need him to do in that aspect. He has a small company with a few good men that he works with, and that's what he does. But unfortunately, Jennifer hasn't really found her place. She used to do interior design, and she loved doing that in New York City. There was always somewhere to go and something to do to figure out, you know, the best fabrics, furniture, paint, whatever for her clients. But now that she's in upstate New York, not a lot of people are needing an interior decorator. So she's trying to figure that out. And she's also feeling a bit unfulfilled because she doesn't really have her own life anymore. She doesn't have her own thing. So her and Keith are sort of just existing in this little bubble that they have at the moment, which is Keith goes to work and Jennifer kind of just makes some lunch and sort of tries to find out how to get her interior design business going. Jennifer also has a very handsome male friend. He's married, but they are very close and she loves spending time with him. She loves spending time with him, especially now, because he reminds her of her old life. And she gets to, just be excited and talk about the things that she loves so much with him. Interior design, and he's an antique dealer, so they get to just talk about this world together. And Keith often feels left out, so it's not really his favorite thing. So one day, Keith and Jennifer return home from a vacation that they had, just a very short vacation to get away for a little while. And when they come back, they notice very quickly out of their kitchen window, in the empty rural field that was there before, is now a fully erected Victorian house. Keith is very perplexed by this, and he has to know, how did that house get there and what's going on? And this house is now blocking their view that they had. And he's like upset, but also interested, intrigued about what's going on. So he decides to go over to this house on his own, and the door just happens to be open. So he walks inside and he takes a look around. There's nobody there. The house is completely empty of furniture or of any signs of anyone living there, but he does find something. And it seems like it just fell out of the ceiling. It's a coin, and it's very, very old. It's so old that Keith can't even read anything on it, but it looks like there's something on it, like a profile of someone, but he can't tell who or what. So later that night, Jennifer's male friend comes over for dinner, and since he's an antique dealer, Keith asks him if he wouldn't mind finding out what this coin was and when it was made and all that good stuff. David, the antique dealer, was like, sure, no problem. Except when he takes the coin in his hand, he starts to have these very intense hallucinations. And that's when our story really begins. So I got this book in a abominable book box, and as soon as I opened it up, I was like, oh God, I gotta read this. I am just compelled to read it as soon as possible, which I did. So I did read this like a month ago, I think, almost, and it was great. It has that 1970s kind of vibe. It was written in 1981, but it has that 70s kind of horror vibe. So it's interesting because it's a study about relationships and marriage, and like everyone in this book is beholden to something. So the relationships between Jennifer and Keith and David are really interesting because I think we've all kind of been there where we've, maybe we have a significant other who has this best friend who's just perfect in every way. And you can tell that, your partner just lights up when they're around. And then in the background, you have this house which is looming. It's just this dark, ominous place. It's looming, but it's also calling at the same time. So you have all of this roughness, like all of this texture between people, and then kind of like this slow churning of things, like just this slow churning. It's all I can really say. And it's cool. It's done so well. It's sort of like a very quiet note that someone is playing, but then it gets louder and louder and louder and louder. It's like that, and I think it's so clever. Early on in the book, Jennifer mentioned something about like how she didn't really anticipate it to be this hard when she moved to rural upstate New York, to find a work and to find a career and stuff like that. And I also had made that move from New York City to rural upstate New York and found the same problem, which was like, yeah, there's not a lot here, so you're not really going to find, you know, many options. And I just remember how isolating that felt and how hopeless that felt. So that kind of made me feel closer to Jennifer when I was reading this book. I oftentimes, when I read books about upstate New York or something, or New York in general, so many times it feels like the author's actually never been there, or they've only been there on vacation or something and have never lived there. And there's all these like nuances and complexities with New York. I was talking to somebody who had read this, and I don't think they really loved the grand finale, I guess is what we can call it, but I kind of liked it. I will say that, like we were talking about ancient horror. So when we're talking about ancient horror concepts, there are things like chimeras. Chimeras were just used as something to be unnatural, and that's what they were trying to express. So when we see it now, we don't really see it to be, it's not scary, you know, to see like maybe like a duck with a horse head or something and like dog feet or something like that. Like that's not terrifying to us. But for medieval people, that was extremely scary because it was unnatural. So there's no, you know, horse, duck, dog animals in here. But what I just mean is it's like, I think it was staying true to kind of ancient terror and kind of ancient horror in its reveal. And I really like that. I'm down with that. So the dialogue was also really good and the relationships made sense. My only complaints about the book were I didn't really love the epilogue at the end. I just didn't really think it was necessary. And I wish that there had been a little bit more about the source of the haunting or the supernatural aspect. I wish there had just been more, because they kind of tell you about it a little bit, but you don't really get to know much about it, which, you know, you can go one way or the other with that, where it's like, oh, not knowing is cool, and oh, knowing a little bit more would have been awesome. So I was really curious, and I think I would have liked to know a little bit more about that story. But yeah. So I gave 666, 86 points out of 114. That is a 4-star review. Still a really solid book, really fun to read, moves really easily, great dialogue, interesting story, and some creepy, chilling moments. I was wondering if I was going to remember anything about the book, because I'd read it like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and my mind, I have one of those memories that like, if I'm just not like doing or seeing it constantly, it just goes. So I was glad I remembered. So that was my double feature, my 2 vintage books that featured ancient demonic evil. I hope you enjoyed the reviews. If you did, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also, if you have a suggestion for an author that I should interview next, it'll need to be someone alive, because my necromancy is not really that good yet. But, you know, also someone who's accessible. I will definitely try to get to that person. Thank you so much for spending your free time with me. I really do appreciate that. If you're on Instagram, you can follow me at Harpies in the Trees. So that's it for me. Take care of yourself, watch out for each other, and I will talk to you next time.